Bones. Human bones in the heart of wild Montana. Jack Thompson took a step back when he realized what he was looking at. A gold chain with a medallion glinted between the rocks, and next to it lay the remains of someone who had once been a living person. These bones had been lying here for 8 years, in Lost Horse Canyon, 30 miles from the nearest road. For 8 years, someone had been waiting. For 8 years, the truth had been buried under a pile of rocks. Jack took off his worn cowboy hat and wiped the sweat from his forehead. The October sun was still warm, but the canyon was already cold with the approaching winter. He was looking for a missing calf, but found something else entirely. The horse snorted and backed away, as if sensing something sinister in this place. Before we begin the story, please write which city you are from. We are very interested in where you are watching our video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. "Easy, Dakota," Jack patted the bay mare on the neck. He took gloves out of his saddlebag and carefully lifted the medallion. The engraving was clear despite the years. To William Harris from his loving family, 1990. William Harris. That name meant something. Jack remembered the old newspaper headlines, the conversations in the bars of Missoula. A missing veterinarian. Disappeared in the mountains in the spring of '95. They searched for weeks, but never found him. And now here he was, or what was left of him. Jack took out his satellite phone. A regular cell phone wouldn't work here. He dialed the Ravalli County Sheriff's Office. "Sheriff Carter, this is Jack Thompson. I'm in Lost Horse Canyon. I'll give you the coordinates. I found human remains." "Yes, I'm sure. There's a medallion with a name on it. William Harris." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then the sheriff slowly said, "Don't touch anything. We're on our way." While Jack waited for the police, he examined the site. It was strange how neatly the stones had been arranged. It wasn't a landslide or natural erosion. Someone had deliberately covered the body. Someone who wanted William Harris to disappear forever. The helicopter arrived 2 hours later. The first to jump out was a detective in plain clothes, a strong man of about 45 with short hair and a keen gaze. "Robert Anderson, State Police," he said, shaking Jack's hand. "Show me where you found him." A team of forensic experts arrived shortly after. They cordoned off the area and began taking photographs and collecting evidence. A female forensic expert wearing glasses carefully examined the skull. "Gunshot wound," she said quietly to Anderson. "Entry wound in the back of the head, approximately .38 caliber." "Murder," Anderson nodded. "Mr. Thompson, tell us in detail how you found the remains." Jack told them about the missing calf, how the horse had been spooked, and the glint of a gold chain between the rocks. Anderson wrote down every word. "Did you know William Harris?" "No, but I've heard the story. Everyone around here knows it. The old man disappeared in '95, and they searched everywhere. His wife still lives in Missoula. Or rather, she did. I heard she died last year without ever finding out what happened to her husband." Anderson frowned. 8 years was a long time. Witnesses could die, evidence could disappear. But he had a body. He had the murder weapon, the bullet that would be extracted from the skull. And he had a mystery. How did William Harris end up 30 miles from where he was last seen? May 1995. Missoula, Montana. It was a cool morning for late spring. William Harris was loading his Ford pickup truck, getting ready for his annual fishing trip to the mountains. 68 years old was no age for an avid fisherman and hunter. He had spent his entire life in these parts and knew every trail and every stream where trout could be found. "Bill, why don't you take someone with you this year?" Mary stood on the porch, wrapped in a shawl. "Call Michael and ask him to go with you." "Mary, we've already discussed this. I need to be alone. A week in the mountains is my tradition. I'll be back on the 20th, as always." He walked over to his wife and hugged her. Mary could feel how tense his body was. Bill hadn't been himself for the last few months. He was nervous, slept poorly, and flinched at loud noises. She attributed it to age and fatigue from working at the veterinary clinic. "Is something wrong? You can tell me," she said, looking into his eyes. "Everything's fine. I'm just tired. I'll get some rest in the country and come back as good as new." But there was a false note in his voice. 38 years of marriage had taught Mary to sense when her husband was hiding something. She just couldn't imagine what it was. William got into his pickup truck and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, he saw Mary waving at him. If he had known that he was seeing her for the last time, would he have stayed, or would he have gone to the meeting that awaited him in the mountains? The drive to Blodgett Trail took 2 hours. William turned onto the familiar dirt road and drove another mile to the parking lot at the trailhead. A beat-up Cherokee was already there. William recognized the car, though he had hoped it wouldn't be there. Thomas Ridgway sat on the hood, smoking. He looked bad, emaciated, with an unhealthy complexion and a nervous twitch in his left eye. His limp, shot-up leg from Vietnam dragged behind him as he walked. "Hey, Doc!" Ridgway jumped off the hood. "I thought you weren't coming." "I always keep my promises, Tom, even the ones I shouldn't have made." "Shouldn't have?" Ridgway grinned. "You left me to die in that damn jungle? If it hadn't been for the Viet Cong who picked me up, I would have died there. 10 years in captivity, Doc. 10 years. I tried to get you out, but the order came to retreat. The helicopters were leaving." "Liar!" Ridgway stepped closer. He reeked of cheap whiskey. "You chickened out. You decided to save your own skin." William shook his head wearily. They had been through this every month for the past year and a half, ever since Ridgway had found him. His former comrade demanded money for his silence. He threatened to tell everyone that a respected veterinarian had abandoned a wounded comrade. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. The stain would stick to William's name forever. "How much this time?" William asked. $50,000. "What? Tom, that's crazy. I don't have that kind of money." "You have a house, a business. Sell something, or I'll go to your wife. I'll tell her what kind of hero you really are." William felt anger rising inside him. He had been paying for a year and a half, first $500 a month, then $1,000. He had opened a secret account and lied to Mary about his expenses. And now, $50,000. "That's enough, Tom. I'm not paying any more. Do whatever you want." "Are you serious?" Ridgway pulled a .38 revolver from his pocket. "What if I do this?" October 2003. Detective Anderson sat in his office in Helena, Montana, studying the case of William Harris. The remains had been confirmed as those of the missing veterinarian. DNA analysis matched samples taken from his son Michael. The cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head, a .38 caliber bullet fired at close range. But the most interesting information came from the bank records that were obtained. A year and a half before his disappearance, William opened a separate account at Wells Fargo Bank. Every month, he withdrew between $500 and $1,000 in cash. The last withdrawal was 3 days before his disappearance, $2,000. Anderson called Michael Harris. "Mr. Harris? Detective Anderson, I need to ask you a few questions about your father. Did he ever mention any financial problems?" "No, never. My father had a successful practice. My mother said they were saving for retirement." "Any enemies? Maybe someone threatened him?" "My father was the kindest man in the world. He often treated farmers' animals for free if they couldn't afford it. Everyone loved him." "Did he serve in Vietnam?" "Yes, as a medic, but he never talked about the war. It was a closed subject." Vietnam. Anderson made a note in his notebook. Many veterans returned from that war broken. Maybe the past had caught up with William Harris. Anderson decided to visit Mary Harris, or rather, the place where she was buried. At the Missoula Cemetery, he found a modest granite headstone. Mary Harris, 1930-2002, loving wife and mother. Next to it was an empty space, for William, who was never found. "She believed until the end that he was alive," said a voice behind him. Anderson turned around. Standing in front of him was a woman in her mid-30s, Sarah Harris, William's daughter. "Miss Harris, I'm Detective Anderson." "I know who you are. Michael called me. Is it true? Did you find my father?" "Yes, I'm very sorry." Sarah nodded, holding back tears. "How did he die?" "He was killed." "Miss Harris, did your father ever talk about his service in Vietnam?" "Never. It was taboo. Once I found his military photos in the attic. My father got very angry and took them away. He said the past should stay in the past." "Do you remember what was in the photos?" "A group photo. My father with other soldiers. There were about 10 of them. And one of the photos was dated 1968. Khe Sanh. Khe Sanh, one of the bloodiest battles of the Vietnam War. Anderson wrote down the name. He needed to find William's fellow soldiers. In the Pentagon archives, Anderson found a list of the unit William Harris had served in. Medical Corps, 26th Marine Regiment. Of the 12 men in the photo, 7 had died in Vietnam and 2 had died after the war. Only 3 were still alive, including William. The second survivor, George McLeod, lived in Florida. Anderson called him. "Mr. McLeod, I'm investigating the murder of William Harris. You served with him in Vietnam." "Bill's dead? My God! When?" 8 years ago. Mr. McLeod, did you keep in touch after the war?" "No. After Vietnam, everyone went their separate ways. Too many bad memories." "What about Thomas Ridgway? Did you know him?" A long pause. "Tom, he died in '68. He was shot during the retreat from Khe Sanh." "Are you sure?" "Bill said he saw Tom fall. We couldn't get the body. The Viet Cong were advancing. Why are you asking?" Anderson didn't answer. He was already searching the database for the name Thomas Ridgway. And he found it. Ridgway wasn't dead. He had been captured and returned to the U.S. in 1990 as part of a prisoner of war repatriation program. Current address, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. The detective picked up the phone and dialed his partner's number. "Jim, get ready. We're going to Idaho. I think I know who killed William Harris." Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. A small town on the shore of a lake, popular with tourists in the summer and almost deserted in the winter. Detective Anderson and his partner Jim Coulter drove into town early in the morning. Thomas Ridgway's address led them to the outskirts, to a dilapidated trailer in a mobile home park. "Nice place," Coulter grimaced, looking at the peeling paint and broken steps. Anderson knocked on the door. No one answered. He knocked louder. "Thomas Ridgway, Montana State Police. We need to talk." There was the sound of breaking glass from the back of the trailer. Coulter rushed over, Anderson following close behind. An elderly man with a noticeable limp jumped out of the window. Ridgway. He tried to run, but his lame leg gave way. Coulter caught up with him 20 yards away. "Stop! Hands behind your head!" Ridgway fell to his knees, breathing heavily. Up close, he looked even worse than in his old military photos, the emaciated face of an alcoholic, trembling hands, a crazed look in his eyes. "I didn't do anything," he croaked. "Then why did you run?" Anderson handcuffed him. "I thought you were after me for money. I owe some people." The trailer was a mess. Dirty dishes, empty whiskey bottles, old newspapers. On the wall was a faded photograph from the Vietnam era. It was the one with William Harris's unit. "Thomas Ridgway, you're under arrest on suspicion of murdering William Harris." Anderson read him his rights. "Harris?" Ridgway flinched. "I didn't kill him. He did it himself. It was an accident." "An accident with a bullet in the back of the head? You can tell that to the station." At the Coeur d'Alene police station, Ridgway was placed in an interrogation room. Anderson turned on the tape recorder. October 15, 2003, interrogation of Thomas Ridgway. "Mr. Ridgway, tell us about your relationship with William Harris." Ridgway remained silent, staring at the table. "Tom, we know about the money, about the blackmail. We have the bank records. You extorted money from him." "It wasn't extortion. He owed me." "For what?" "For leaving me to die in that damn jungle. 10 years, do you understand? 10 years I rotted in a prisoner of war camp, and he came back a hero, opened his own clinic, lived happily ever after." "And you decided to take revenge?" "I just wanted justice, compensation for my suffering." $50,000 is justice?" Ridgway flinched. "How do you know?" "Tell me what happened on May 15th, 1995. Ridgway was silent for a long time. Then he spoke in a quiet, broken voice. "I found him in '93. I happened to see a newspaper article about a veterinary clinic in Missoula. There was a photo of Bill. I couldn't believe it. I thought everyone in the unit thought I was dead. I drove to Missoula and followed him for a week. He had a wonderful life, a house, a family, a business. And me? A cripple with no money, forgotten by my own country. Did you start blackmailing him?" "I just asked for help. I said I'd tell everyone the truth about Kaysen if he didn't help me. Bill agreed to pay." "But then you wanted more?" "I had debts, bad people. I needed money fast. I asked for $50,000. Bill refused." "And you killed him?" "No, I just wanted to scare him. I got out my gun thinking he'd get scared and agree. But Bill, he lunged at me. We struggled and the gun went off. It was an accident." "And then you took the body to Lost Horse Canyon and hid it?" "I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I loaded him into my Jeep and drove off. I saw the canyon, dumped the body, and covered it with rocks. Then I went back and drove his pickup truck to the parking lot by the Blodgett Trail so everyone would think he got lost in the woods." Confession. Anderson turned off the tape recorder. The case was almost closed. All that remained was to find the murder weapon. "Where's the gun, Tom?" "At home, under the floorboards in the trailer." Coulter drove off with a search warrant. 2 hours later, he returned with a .38 Smith & Wesson revolver in a plastic evidence bag. "Found it. And something else," he said, showing him a second bag. Inside were old military photographs and letters. "These are from Vietnam. Harris's letters to his wife. Ridgway must have taken them after the murder." Anderson looked through the letters. In one dated February 1968, William wrote, "Dear Mary, yesterday we lost Tom Ridgway. I tried to get him out, but the sniper fire was too heavy. The commander ordered us to retreat. I can still hear Tom screaming, begging us not to leave him. This war is taking the best of us. I pray that his death was quick." So William really did try to save Ridgway. But orders are orders. In war, you often have to make impossible choices. Ballistics confirmed that the bullet that killed William Harris came from Ridgway's revolver. The prosecution charged him with second-degree murder. Ridgway agreed to a plea bargain, a confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. Anderson called Michael and Sarah Harris to tell them the news. They traveled to Montana for the trial. In the courtroom, Sarah held her brother's hand as the charges were read. "How could he?" she whispered. "Dad was the kindest man." "War changes people," Michael replied quietly. Both Ridgway and Dad were victims of it. The trial began in February 2004. Prosecutor Elizabeth Stone presented irrefutable evidence: Ridgway's confession, the murder weapon, and ballistics evidence. The defense insisted on mitigating circumstances: Ridgway's post-traumatic stress disorder and his years in captivity. Psychiatrist Dr. Robert Green testified about Ridgway's condition. Mr. Ridgway suffers from severe PTSD. 10 years in captivity, torture, starvation. All of this has left deep psychological scars. He did not receive proper treatment after his return. Alcoholism, depression, paranoid episodes. These are classic symptoms. The prosecutor objected. Psychological problems do not justify murder. Mr. Ridgway systematically blackmailed his victim for a year and a half. This was not a crime of impulse. George McLeod, a colleague of Harris and Ridgway, was called to the witness stand. The old Marine struggled to climb the steps. "Mr. McLeod, tell us about the events of February 1968 in Khe Sanh." "It was hell. The Viet Cong surrounded the base and fired at us day and night. During one of the attacks, Tom was wounded in the leg by shrapnel. We were retreating to the helicopters. Bill tried to drag Tom, but snipers pinned us down. Commander Johnson ordered us to leave the wounded and run to the helicopters. Bill didn't want to, but Johnson pointed his gun at him. He said he would shoot both of us if Bill didn't obey." "So William Harris had no choice?" "None. It was an order. In war, disobeying orders means getting shot." Ridgway listened, his fists clenched. When he was given the floor, he stood up, leaning on his cane. "For 30 years, I thought Bill had abandoned me of his own free will. When the Viet Cong picked me up, I was sure he had chickened out. I survived the camp only because of my hatred for him. It gave me strength. And then, when I came back and found him, I wanted him to suffer like I had. But I didn't want to kill him. I swear it was an accident." Sarah Harris asked to speak. "My father never talked about the war. Now I understand why. He lived with guilt for not being able to save his comrade. My mother told me he had nightmares. He would scream someone's name in his sleep. Now I know it was Mr. Ridgway's name. My father never forgave himself for Khe Sanh." The jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdict was guilty of manslaughter. Judge Margaret Turner read the sentence. "Thomas Ridgway, you are found guilty of manslaughter. Considering your psychological state, your years of suffering in captivity, and the fact that you cooperated with the investigation, the court sentences you to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 7 years." Ridgway lowered his head. 15 years. At his age, that was almost a life sentence. After the trial, Anderson met with the Harris family outside the courthouse. "Justice prevailed?" Sarah asked. "I'm not sure there are any winners in this story," the detective replied. "The war broke both of them, your father and Ridgway. The tragedy is that they could have supported each other, but instead their past destroyed them." Michael nodded. "My father always taught us to forgive. I think he would have forgiven Ridgway." "We want to rebury our father next to our mother," said Sarah. "They should be together." William Harris's funeral was held in March 2004. Many people attended, former clients, friends, neighbors. Jack Thompson, who found the remains, also came. Pastor David Mitchell spoke at the graveside. William Harris was a man who spent his life helping others, first as a military medic, saving the lives of soldiers, then as a veterinarian, treating animals. He carried the burden of war, which we have only now learned about. May he finally rest in peace. After the funeral, Anderson approached Jack Thompson. "Thank you for finding him. The family finally has answers. You know, Detective, I often drive through that canyon, and every time I think, how many more secrets do these mountains hold? How many people have disappeared without a trace?" "Too many," Anderson said, looking at the snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains. "But sometimes the truth comes out, even if it takes 8 years." In a Montana state prison, Thomas Ridgway sat in his cell, staring at an old photograph from Vietnam. 12 young men, full of hope. Now only he was left alive. And George McLeod, who had flown in from Florida to testify against him. The guard brought him a letter. Ridgway was surprised. Who could have written to him? He opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph of William and Mary Harris's grave and a short note from Sarah. "Mr. Ridgway, I thought long and hard about whether to write to you. My father taught us to forgive. I cannot forgive you for taking 8 years of our lives away from us, for letting my mother die without knowing the truth. But I want you to know that my father really tried to save you. I found his diary. Here is an excerpt. Not a day goes by that I don't think about Tom. I hear his screams every night. If I could go back to that day, I would have died with him, but I wouldn't have abandoned my comrade. He never forgave himself. I hope this brings you some comfort. Sarah Harris. Ridgway dropped the letter. Tears streamed down his wrinkled face. 35 years of hatred. 35 years he had lived with a vendetta against a man who, it turned out, had suffered no less than he had. 5 years later, spring 2009. Detective Robert Anderson sat in his office sorting through old cases before retiring. The Harris case was set apart, one of the most memorable of his career. The phone rang. "Detective Anderson, this is George McLeod. Do you remember me? I testified in the Harris case." "Of course I remember. What's going on, Mr. McLeod?" "I received a strange letter from Tom Ridgway, from prison. He says he wants to tell the truth, the whole truth about that day in Khe Sanh." Anderson frowned. The case had been closed 5 years ago. What more could Ridgway have to hide? "He says he's dying. Lung cancer, terminal. He wants to see me and you. He says there's something else about Bill Harris that his children need to know." 2 days later, Anderson was on his way to the Montana State Prison. Sarah Harris was with him. He had called her, and she had insisted on coming. At the prison hospital, they were taken to the ward where Thomas Ridgway was dying. He had lost about 20 pounds. His skin had taken on a yellowish tint, and his eyes were sunken. But his gaze was clear, without the madness Anderson had seen 5 years earlier. "Thank you for coming," Ridgway croaked. "I don't have long left. A week, maybe 2. "Why did you call us?" Sarah asked. "To tell the truth. I lied in court, not about everything, but about the most important thing." Anderson took out his tape recorder. "Do you want to change your testimony?" "I want to tell you what really happened on May 15th, 1995. Ridgway coughed, then continued. "I did ask for $50,000, and Bill did refuse. But he didn't attack me. That was a lie. He said something else. He said he had cancer, that he had 6 months to live, a year at most, and that he hadn't come to fish, but to kill himself in the mountains. He didn't want his family to see him die." Sarah shuddered. Anderson squeezed her hand. "Go on," he said to Ridgway. "Bill showed me his medical records. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He said he'd made a will, taken care of his family, and he asked me for a favor. He asked me to kill him." "What?" Sarah jumped up. "You're lying." "I wish I could lie, Miss Harris, but a dying man has no reason to lie. Your father said he couldn't pull the trigger himself. His upbringing and his faith wouldn't allow it. But if I killed him, it would look like revenge for the past. His family would get the insurance money, and he would be remembered as a victim, not a suicide." "And you agreed?" "Not at first, but Bill, he got down on his knees. Can you imagine? The man I hated for 30 years was kneeling in front of me, begging for mercy. He was crying. He talked about the pain becoming unbearable. He said he didn't want his children to see him helpless." Ridgway fell silent, breathing heavily. And then he said the most important thing. He said that in Khe Sanh, when the commander ordered them to abandon me, Bill took out his gun and wanted to shoot himself, so he wouldn't leave me alone. But the commander knocked the gun out of his hands, hit him with the butt, and dragged him to the helicopter. Bill was unconscious when they flew away. He came to in the air. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. Anderson turned off the tape recorder. "Is there any proof? Medical records?" "Bill burned everything before he left. He said he didn't want the family to know, but check his medical records. A month before he died, he saw an oncologist in Spokane. He used a fake name and paid cash, but the test results should still be there." "Let's say that's true. Why did you hide the body?" "That was his request, too. He said if the body was found right away, the autopsy would reveal the cancer. We needed time for the remains so the disease couldn't be identified. He chose the location himself, Lost Horse Canyon. He said it was beautiful and peaceful." "And the money? Blackmail?" "It was a cover story. For the police if I got caught. Bill gave me $10,000, everything he had on him. He said it was payment for his service. I spent it on debts and booze. I tried to forget what I had done." Sarah stood up and walked over to the window. Behind the bars she could see the mountains, the same ones where her father had died. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm dying just like your father did, of cancer, and I understand now why he didn't want you to see this. It's humiliating to turn into a vegetable, to depend on others. Your father was a proud man. He chose to go on his own terms." "That's still murder," Anderson said. "Yes, and I'm serving his time, but I don't want Bill's children to think their father was a victim. He was a hero, even in death." After the meeting, Anderson drove to Spokane. At St. Luke's Cancer Center, he found what he was looking for: a patient named William Smith, age and blood type matching Harris. Diagnosis: Stage 4 adenocarcinoma of the pancreas. Prognosis: 3 to 6 months. Dr. Martin Cheng, who was treating the patient, remembered him. He refused chemotherapy. He said he wanted to live out the rest of his life with dignity. I prescribed him morphine for the pain, but he didn't even pick up the prescription. He was a strange man, calm, as if he had come to terms with his fate. Anderson returned to Missoula and met with Michael and Sarah Harris at their childhood home. The house had been sold after their mother's death, but the new owners allowed them to visit. "If Ridgway is telling the truth, Dad planned everything in advance," Michael said, studying the documents from Spokane. "He rewrote his will 2 weeks before the trip," Sarah added. "Remember? We wondered why he left money to a veterans fund." "He was preparing," Anderson nodded, "getting his affairs in order." They went up to the attic. In an old trunk under William's military uniform, Sarah found a sealed envelope. It was marked, "To be opened in the event of my death." Inside was a letter. "Dear Michael and Sarah, if you are reading this, I am gone. I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth. The doctors gave me 6 months. I don't want you to see me fade away. I don't want to be a burden. I've had a good life. I've loved and been loved. But the war left a darkness in me that I've hidden all these years. In Khe Sanh, I betrayed a friend. It doesn't matter that it was an order. I should have died with him, but I chickened out. Tom Ridgway is alive. He found me. I'm paying him not for his silence, but as compensation for the years of hell he went through because of my cowardice. If anything happens to me, don't blame him. He's a victim of war, just like me. Take care of Mom. Love each other. Forgive me. Dad." The letter was dated April 1995, a month before his death. "He knew," Sarah whispered. "He planned everything." "But why didn't he tell us?" Michael clenched his fists. "We would have understood." "He wanted to protect you," Anderson said. "And your mom. Imagine how she would have felt, knowing that her husband chose death." They went down to the living room. On the mantelpiece was a family photo: William, Mary, and the children at Christmas 1994, their last Christmas. "What do we do with this information?" Sarah asked. "Nothing," Anderson replied. "The case is closed. Ridgway has been convicted. Your father is buried. Let the truth remain between us." "What about Ridgway?" "He'll die in prison, in a week, maybe 2. He'll atone for his crimes, for the murder, and for not telling the truth in court." 10 days later, Thomas Ridgway died in the prison hospital. Only the prison chaplain and, unexpectedly, Sarah Harris attended the funeral. "Why are you here?" asked the chaplain. "My father taught me to forgive," she replied, and placed a white rose on the coffin. Jack Thompson, the cowboy who found the remains, continued to herd cattle in the vicinity of Lost Horse Canyon. Sometimes he stopped at the place where he found William Harris and thought about the strange ways of fate, about how a war that had taken place 30 years ago on the other side of the world had caught up with 2 men in peaceful Montana. Detective Anderson retired, but the Harris case haunted him. He wrote a book, Shadows of Khe Sanh, about how the trauma of war destroys the lives of veterans decades later. The book became a bestseller and helped draw attention to the problems of Vietnam veterans. Michael Harris created a foundation to help families of missing persons. In 5 years, the foundation helped find 12 missing people in Montana. At every meeting of the foundation, he told his father's story, not the whole truth, but its essence, that sometimes people disappear not because something bad has happened to them, but because they carry a burden too heavy to share. Sarah Harris wrote a book about her father. She called it 8 Years of Silence. In the epilogue, she wrote, "We often think we know the people close to us, but everyone has secrets, pain they hide out of love for us. My father carried the burden of war for 40 years. He chose to leave on his own terms to protect us from the truth about his illness. Was he right? It's not for me to judge. But I know one thing. He loved us more than life itself. And that love lives on in me and my brother, in our children, in the hundreds of animals he saved during his years as a veterinarian. In Lost Horse Canyon, where William was found, there is now a small memorial plaque. Tourists rarely venture into this wilderness, but sometimes hunters or lost travelers stop here. The bronze plaque is engraved with the following words: "In memory of William Harris, 1927-1995, and all veterans whose wounds are invisible to the eye. The war is over, but its shadows remain with us forever." Every year on May 15th, Sarah and Michael come to this place. They bring wildflowers, the same ones their father loved. They stand in silence, remembering a man whom, as it turned out, they did not know completely. In the Montana State Police Archives, the William Harris case is officially closed. But for those who know the whole story, it remains a reminder of the complexity of human nature, that the truth is multifaceted and justice is relative. An old veterinarian from Missoula, the kind Dr. Harris, a man who saved animals and was tormented by guilt over a friend left behind in the war. A veteran of Ridgeway who spent 10 years in captivity and returned home broken and embittered. 2 men whose fates were intertwined by war and destroyed by a single May encounter in the mountains of Montana. The story of William Harris is a story about choices, about the choices we make in the face of death, illness, and guilt, about how the past shapes our present, and how sometimes the only way to protect those we love is to walk away without explanation. George McLeod, the last survivor of their unit, died in Florida in 2010. Before his death, he sent Sarah Harris a package. Inside was a photograph from Vietnam, the same group photo. On the back, George wrote, "We were kids sent to war. Bill was the best of us, the kindest, the bravest. What happened at Khe Sanh broke him, but he lived a good life helping others. That's more than many of us did. Remember him as he was, young, full of hope, before the war left its scars on all of us." Today, years after this story, Lost Horse Canyon remains a place of remembrance, not only for William Harris, but for all those who did not return from the war, physically or spiritually, of those who carry invisible wounds for decades. Detective Anderson, now well into retirement, sometimes comes here to fish. He thinks about the case that changed his view of justice, about how sometimes the truth is more complicated than it seems, and people who do terrible things can be victims of circumstance. The last time Anderson was in the canyon, he met a young man with a backpack. The guy was taking pictures of a memorial plaque. "Did you know him?" the guy asked. "In a way," Anderson replied. "I investigated his death." "What happened?" Anderson paused, looking at the mountains. "War happened, a war that ended 30 years before he died, but whose shadows caught up with him here, in this peaceful place." The young man nodded, not fully understanding. He was too young to know about Vietnam from anything other than textbooks. But someday, perhaps, he would remember this conversation and understand what the old detective had meant. The William Harris case is now taught at the Montana Police Academy as an example of how not all crimes are black and white, not all victims are innocent, and not all criminals are evil. It is a story of human tragedy that spanned decades and continents. Now here's a question for you, dear viewers. If you found out that someone close to you was terminally ill and asked you to help them die with dignity, what would you do? A. Help them, understanding their choice. B. Refused and fought for every day of his life. Or C. Tried to find an alternative, such as a hospice? Write in the comments what you would choose and why. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new amazing stories from real life.